So in this video, I'm going to show you how to take your nails from this. I just removed my gel at this point to this using Peachy products and tools. So if you buy any of the Peachy nail kits, you'll receive a nail file. So my nails are quite long at the moment, so ideally you would take nail clippers and cut them down, but I didn't have any. So I'm just filing. I'm taking the length down, and to get the rounded shape that I like, I focus on the sides, bringing the sides in, and then kind of curving around at the edge. It can be a little bit tricky if you're not used to shaping your own nails, but you do get the hang of it eventually. And you can see here kind of watching the technique that I'm doing. And I'll show you how to get a square nail shape as well if you prefer that. So if you want a square nail shape, you're going to take your file and, just as I'm doing, go in one direction across the nail with an even pressure all the way around so you get that flat edge. And then you want to take the nail file and slightly curve the side so you don't have that sharp corner, because that will be the first thing to chip and it gives you a little bit more of a softer look. So next you're going to take your cuticle remover from Peachy. So you just paint that. It's really easy to apply around the cuticle essentially. Try not to get it on the nail if you can, but this will help to dissolve the cuticle and make it a little bit softer to make pushing it back easier. And so then you're going to take your cuticle pusher, and with the rounded side, just as I'm doing here, you're going to follow the curve of the nail and essentially just push up. It shouldn't be uncomfortable, it shouldn't be too hard. It should be just enough to lift any dead skin on the nail plate that we don't want for when we're painting off. And so at this point, I would take some acetone on either a lint-free pad or, a cotton pad. If you've got one, just make sure there's no fluff left. And I'm going to use that to remove the cuticle remover, and you'll notice I'm pushing up the way against the cuticle to help lift up the cuticle that we've pushed so we can prepare to buff. So I use the buffer to help me with the cuticle, to be honest, because I find it really takes off any excess skin. So you want to buff the nail as little as possible. So you can see what I'm doing here is taking the edge of the buffer and on the corner going right around the cuticle line. Just like that, and then I take it across the tip as well, because sometimes when you're filing you can get layers of nail from underneath that make it more difficult to cap the nail with the polish, so I take it along the edge as well. And you want to just give a light buff over the bulk of the nail plate, but I tend to focus this part on the cuticle area. And for this next part, I don't actually recommend cutting your own cuticles at home because it can be quite fiddly and quite dangerous. So this part is really just to show you what I did at home in my manicure, and it's also quite satisfying. You actually don't need to cut your cuticles at home because all you're focusing on doing is pushing and lifting the excess cuticle from the nail plate so that we have a really clean nail plate to paint the polish onto. And once you've got your cuticle oil on, you won't notice if you've got any kind of excess cuticle pushed back on the nail. So next you're going to take your polish. So you need your base coat, your colour and your peachy top coat. So we'll start with base coat. I just want to show you how much to take onto the brush. So I dip in, I wipe the polish completely off of one side and I wipe it halfway off the other side. You want quite a thin layer with your base coat because you want it to dry quite quickly and you don't need to have a lot on. And so the technique for painting base coat, I go on initially with one swipe in the middle of the nail, and then I edge my way down to the base of the cuticle because the brush will naturally fan out into that kind of rounded shape. And then I go slide up one side and slide up the other side of the nail, and then I will cap the end just like that. So when you're working with normal polish, you want to get your polish on in as little strokes as possible because it's drying from the moment that you paint it on the nail. So you just want to wait a couple of minutes until that's dry and then come on with your first coat of colour. So I'm doing the same technique here that I did for the base coat. I'm wiping all the way off one side and wiping only half off the other, so you only have a little bit on the tip. Again, for your base, for your first colour of polish, sorry, you don't need a thick layer. You still want it to be really thin. So same technique as the base coat. I'm placing the brush in the middle of the nail and then I'm slowly edging forward, pushing that polish to the cuticle without touching it, and then swiping up one side of the nail and swiping up the other and then sealing the edge. My best tip to getting an at-home manicure to look more professional is to leave more room around the cuticle than you need. I think when polish gets on the cuticle, or if the polish floods the whole cuticle, that's when it starts to look a little bit messy. So when we're training, we try and say to leave a hairline gap around the cuticle where there's no polish. But if you're not very used to doing nails, leave a couple of hairline gaps. And that way you can create the shape of the nail that you want with the nail polish, if that makes sense. So as you can see when I'm doing these nails, there's actually quite a large gap around the base of the cuticle and coming up the side walls. But it's much easier to do it that way than to try and get too close to the cuticle and then end up flooding or getting colour on the cuticle. And when you do the top coat, it's really forgiving, so it'll just make it look really shiny and really neat. So after a few minutes, once the first coat's dried, you go in with the second coat. Now you take a little bit more polish on your brush this time. You want to use this second coat to kind of correct any of the maybe bumpiness that is there from the first coat, and you essentially just follow the line all the way around the cuticle and again seal the edge. If you notice you've got a little bit of polish on the skin, I'm using an orange wood stick, but you can take your cuticle pusher and just wipe it off if you get it in enough time. If you don't, just dip your cuticle pusher in a little bit of acetone and wipe over that area, and it should come off really easily. And so I noticed I'd chipped a little bit on my thumb before I did the top coat. So you don't need to take the whole polish off. Just take a little bit of polish from the brush and just kind of do a patchwork where it needs touched up. So just do a little dot. The top coat's really forgiving, so you won't notice by the time we're finished. So when you're doing your top coat, there's a technique called floating that you can do to make it look more professional. So this essentially means taking a good amount of top coat. You can see how much I had on the brush there. And with really light pressure, just pulling and lifting the top coat across the polish. You can run into trouble if you don't have enough top coat on your brush and you push too hard. That can disturb the layers underneath, but floating it like this with a little bit more top coat and a really light pressure gives a gel-like finish. And here is the exact moment that I realised I'd smudged one of my other nails. So again, this isn't an issue. I would just wait until that second coat is quite dry, you know, maybe 5 minutes after you painted, and very lightly just pat the polish. And what you're trying to do when you pat it is just to take the texture out of it, because the top coat, like I say, is really forgiving and you won't notice when it's on. So using the same top coat floating method here, I'm just going to show you how easy something like this is to correct. So I'm just showing you here a few different angles of the floating method, and we're almost finished. And finally, about 10 minutes after you've painted your top coat, you want to moisturise your cuticles so you can pop your oil on, and that is you done. So that is a full peachy manicure using the colour African Sunset. Don't forget to use our code for 10% off if you want to purchase any of the kits or polishes from Peachy.